In today's video, we'll be going over Alabama's roster for next year. In our previous video, we went over USC's roster and went over position by position. And that video is doing pretty well. So if you like this kind of content, go ahead and drop a like right now. And comment below which school I should go over next. Whether it's Oklahoma or Georgia or anyone. I don't know. Comment below which school you want me to consider next and review next. Enjoy the video.
Whose world is this? The world is yours. The world is yours. It's mine. Whose world?
So, Alabama has played 7 of the 8 college football playoffs. They have accumulated 183 victories and won 6 national championships under Nick Saban. With quarterback Bryce Young and defender Will Anderson Jr. returning to the team, there's no doubt that Alabama won't be #1 next year in the preseason rankings. But besides those two, who else is on the roster to make this happen? Today we'll break down each position group. I will personally highlight any major departures from the position group, give an analysis on the group as a whole, and choose who will be the spotlight player of that position group accordingly. So first we have the quarterbacks. There has been one major departure, and that's Paul Tyson. Now Paul served as Alabama's backup quarterback. He finished the season with 10 completions out of 16 attempts for 150 yards. Which isn't bad considering you're backing up the Heisman winner. Even with the departure of Tyson, this position group is in great shape. Bryce won the Heisman winner will maintain his starting position, obviously. Plus you have JALEN MILROE, who was just a freshman last year. Now MILROE was one of the top dual threat quarterbacks coming out of high school, and he was a consensus 4-star prospect, which is some good talent to have behind a Heisman winner. Alabama also adds Ty Simpson, a 5-star quarterback in this year's class who was ranked a #3 quarterback. So even though you lose your backup quarterback, you still have the Heisman. You have a 4-star that was a true freshman last year, and you have a 5-star coming in. So safe to say, Alabama's quarterback room is good to go. And the spotlight player is no other than the Heisman Trophy winner, Bryce Young. There's nothing else to say. Now we have the running back room. Alabama unfortunately loses his leading rusher, the top rusher of the team, Brian Robinson Jr., as he's entering an NFL draft. Now Brian accounted for nearly 50% of the carries in Tuscaloosa last season. He rushed for over 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns on 271 attempts. They also lose former 5-star recruit Kamar Wheaton. Now Kamar just isn't on the roster anymore. I'm pretty sure it's because of personal reasons, but that's a big loss having the 5-star recruit not on the roster anymore. But they have some talent to make up for it. As I said, Alabama loses its top back from the 2021 season, but it returns the rest of the group. Among that group is Trey Sanders, who had 72 carries last year, Wardell Williams, who had 48, and JASE McClellan, who had 40. Both Williams and McClellan are in the mend from injuries. Alabama also added Georgia Tech transfer Jahmyr Gibbs, who was actually our spotlight player. Gibbs is a former 4-star recruit and could slide into the #1 role this fall. The Georgia native ran for 746 yards and 4 scores, caught 36 passes for 470 yards, and added 589 yards on kickoff returns. So this is a very dynamic player that Alabama just brought in. The talented back should push for all SEC honors at the end of the season. But in all, Alabama's running back room, they lost their leading rusher, but Jahmyr Gibbs is a huge pickup. And then you have those other 3 guys that had some carries throughout the season, so they should be good backups. Next, we have our wide receiver room. Now, Alabama is actually losing their #1 and #2 receivers in Jameson Williams and John Mechie III. Both Williams and Mechie accounted for 175 of Alabama's 380 catches, 2,714 yards of his 5,073 receiving yards, and 23 out of his 48 total touchdown receptions. That's a lot of stats that Alabama's going to be missing out next year. Needless to say, both players and their skill sets is going to be missed for Alabama's offense next year. So once again, Alabama will have to replace some top talent at the wide receiver position this offseason. Losing Williams and Mechie is no different. Alabama has a young group of receivers in the wings who have a chance to fill those spots, such as Iron Bowl hero Ja'Cory Brooks. The Crimson Tide also looked to the transfer portal with Georgia transfer Jermaine Burton, who is actually our spotlight player for the wide receiver position. Now, Burton seemed primed for a monster year for the Bulldogs in 2021 after catching 27 passes for 404 yards and 3 touchdowns as a freshman. However, injuries limited Burton at times in 2021, as he only finished with 26 catches for 497 yards and 5 touchdowns. The California native has a ton of potential untapped and could help fill the void left behind from Jameson Williams as he's off to the NFL draft. The next position group is the tight ends. as they only lose one major tight end, former coach starter Jaleel Billingsley, to the transfer portal. But retaining Cameron Latou was more important for Alabama this offseason. Blocking tight end Kendall Rudolph also returns next year for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And our spotlight player for the tight end position is actually Cameron Latou. I mean, Latou finished with 26 catches for 410 yards and 8 touchdowns this past year. His 8 touchdowns ranked second nationally of all tight ends in the Power 5. The next position is the offensive line. Now, Alabama actually loses both of his starting tackles from last year, including potential top 5 pick Evan Neal and 6-year senior Chris Owens to the NFL draft. That duo logged 50 combined starts over the past 3 years. The Crimson Tide also lost their 2 reserve guards to the transfer portal, and Pierre Quick, who's going to Georgia Tech, and Tommy Brown, who's going to Colorado. So Alabama will undergo more shuffling at the offensive line position for next year, with both starting tackles leaving for the pros. I mean, replacing Neal won't be easy, and it will be interesting to see who ends up at left tackle. Alabama also has young offensive linemen with pedigree, but who gets the spotlight for offensive line position will have to go to Alabama's young 5-star tackles. This offseason departures could open up playing time for former 5-stars J.C. Latham and Tommy Brockemeyer. Now for the defensive line position. The defensive line is actually losing 2 good players in the NFL draft. First, we have Fedarian Mathis, who was selected as a second-team All-American this year, with 53 tackles and 9 sacks. And then we have LeBron Ray, who had 11 tackles, including 3 for loss, and 1 sack this past year. So Mathis was consistently one of Alabama's best players of the defensive side of the ball. His pass rush complemented Will Anderson Jr. really well. The defensive ends who remain, such as Byron Young, will need to step up. Young was second behind Mathis in tackles for loss with 9.5. And he had 2 sacks, which actually makes him our spotlight player for the defensive line. Overall, Nick Saban knows how to get his defensive line right. Even though he's more of a defensive back coach, he has the right coaches in line to get that defense ready. So I'm not worried about the defensive line whatsoever, even though they're losing their top defensive player besides Will Anderson Jr. But let's move on to the linebacker position. Now, in my opinion, Alabama's linebacking core lost the most out of any position group on the roster. They lose 2 good linebackers. First, we have Christian Harris, who had 79 tackles, 12.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, 3 pass breakups, and 2 forced fumbles. Then they also lose Christopher Allen, who actually suffered a foot injury in the season opener against Miami that kept him off the field for the remainder of the season. But he was selected as all SEC for last year's team. So losing both Christian Harris and Christopher Allen to the NFL draft really hurts. But besides those 2 players, they also lose 4 players to the transfer portal. Now, the loss of Harris will be amongst the most significant spots for Alabama to fill for 2022. But keeping Henry Tutu will make that transition that much easier, considering his leadership and his ability to organize the defense. Also, Moody removing his name from the transfer portal was also big for Alabama and his linebacking core, because it brings back a player who has 4 seasons of experience under his belt in an otherwise inexperienced room. As for the outside linebackers, Alabama remains strong with Will Anderson Jr. and Dallas Turner returning. Injuries could test a new depth though, but our spotlight player is Will Anderson Jr., a player who I think should have been considered more for the Heisman Trophy. Moving on to our last position for Alabama's depth chart, the defensive backs. Now, the defensive backs are losing 2 key players to the NFL draft. First, we have Jalen Armour-Davis. Now, Jalen was all SEC second team with 3 interceptions, 32 tackles, and 1 tackle for loss, to also go along with 4 pass breakups. Then we have Josh Jobe, who had 38 total tackles, including 1 for loss, 4 pass breakups, and 2 interceptions. And then they also lose Marcus Banks to the transfer portal. Due to injuries down the stretch, it allowed for Kool-Aid McKinstry and Kyrie Jackson to start and get more playing time and more experience underneath their belt. Alabama also added LSU transfer Eli Ricks to the roster, who is expected to compete for a starting position right away. The Crimson Tide also got to keep both their starting safeties in DeMarco Hellens and Jordan Battle, which was very significant and key to their defense. But our spotlight player for the defensive back group is no other than LSU transfer Eli Ricks. I mean, with Josh Jobe and Jalen Armour-Davis off to the NFL draft, Alabama needed an impact corner to team with Kool-Aid McKinstry. Ricks fills that need and then some. I mean, Ricks is a former 5-star player and should step into the starting lineup from day 1. And there you have it, breaking down Alabama's full roster, position by position, with a little analysis of the players returning, key players that are leaving, and a spotlight player for each position. Comment below your thoughts on Alabama. Do you think they should be the preseason #1 ranked team with Will Anderson Jr. and Bryce Young returning. And then you have key transfer players in Eli Ricks, Jermaine Burton, and Jahmyr Gibbs at the running back position. Comment below your thoughts. I think those are some huge gets, especially when you have the Heisman Trophy winner returning to your team. But comment below your thoughts. And like I always say, if you love college football or college football recruiting, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. And comment below which team you'd like to see next for a whole analysis of their whole depth chart in their roster and position by position. And last but not least, go ahead and leave a like for your boy. But until next time,